Welcome to the Imaginaries.
Hello, and welcome to the Imaginaries podcast, where we take long hiatuses in the summer and then return to talk about the science fiction that we might have missed in the meantime. Today we are going to discuss our favorites of 2018 so far. We're really excited about this podcast because it is, in fact, the month of July. So we are slightly past the midpoint of the year. And there has already been some spectacular science fiction science fiction and fantasy, that we do not want to get buried by the time that award season comes around. So yes. My name is Ken, and I'm here with my fellow podcaster, Tony. Say hi.
Hi.
And Tony, I was wondering if we should perhaps just take this chronologically from January, seeing as how we have a lovely, nice spreadsheet tracking both of our reading habits and all of the release dates for all of the books we plan to read this year.
Yes, correct.
Would you like to give us your first pick from January?
Well, why don't we say maybe what was our favorite book from each month, and then talk about any movies or TV shows that came out or finished then, or TV shows finished, movies came out. Sorry. Yeah. How about that? How about it?
I mean, because it was a really good month.
I'm looking through it now.
Yeah. I mean, I think my favorite book from the month of January was actually a collection, which we've mentioned on the podcast before. Uh-huh. And that collection is Robots versus Fairies, which was edited by Dominic Parisian and Neva Wolf. And this collection really kind of changed how I perceived collections. Prior to January of this year, I was not in the habit of picking up collections and reading them for pleasure. I would pretty much only ever pick up a collection if it was a requirement for a class. In fact, I have taken a collection class in grad school, and it was kind of joyless. So this was really groundbreaking for me to find a collection that made me want to read more collections. And part of it comes down to the collective impulse behind the book. They issued a challenge to some of their favorite science fictional and fantastical authors to basically pit robots versus fairies against each other, write that story, and pick the outcome, and then explain why they chose robots or fairies. And this wasn't a collection of old stories. It was all previously unpublished material, and it had a narrative tightness to the whole collection that a lot of collections lack, because a lot of collections are best ofs or previously published material that we just happen to like and may not share much in common with each other. So yeah, that would be my pick. What
cool.
about you?
Well, I want to second that. That's really an awesome pick. Right now, I think it's my favorite collection of the year. And like you, I didn't really pay that much attention to collections. I kind of was aware of them. I think I had one or two, but this not only made me pay more attention to collections in general, but made me pay attention to collections by that pair of editors. I bought their other, I think they only have one other edited collection called The Starlit Wood. But both of those books were fantastic. Robots versus Fairies, obviously, we're talking about because it was this year. I will say about that, though, that the stories were fantastic. They were presented in a really interesting way. I pretty much just read right through that book. I didn't skip anything. I didn't skip around. I read it as they wanted it to be collected. But the thing I found least compelling about the book were the footnotes of robots versus fairies. And I get that was the whole that was the concept. It was robots versus fairies. Here's a story about robots, here's a story about fairies. And I really liked how each of the authors subverted that in a different way, or took it on, as it said on the package, but in a completely different way than I expected. But I just didn't really care about the footnotes.
Sure. And I mean, any collection is going to be uneven in some ways, just because you will like some styles and some concepts more than others. And I can think of a couple that were forgettable. I remember the authors being in there, but I don't really remember much about the stories they included. But there were enough really high quality stories in there to kind of offset that.
Yeah.
I'd say having now picked up a bunch of collections since and kind of been like, whoa, collections can be great. And then having been like a little bit disappointed that they're not all robots versus fairies. I can say that the preponderance of stories in robots versus fairies is high quality compared to other collections that I have found.
Right.
So I'm pretty happy with it, even if it's got those, things.
Yeah. And I say that to highlight what is, in my mind, its one shortcoming. Like, this is a collection that holds itself to a very, very, very high standard. There's really only one story that I didn't enjoy, and I won't call it out by name. We both know which story I'm thinking of. But I will say, if you read the collection, it's, well, not that everyone will think the same thing, but if you come across a story and you're like, wow, that really felt half-assed, it's probably that one.
Okay, moving on to some other high points of January. Yes,
so high point. Melissa Albert's The Hazelwood.
Ooh, yes.
Which I've seen, like, half the time categorized as YA and half the time categorized as, like, adult fantasy or adult science fiction. I don't know. I think it's a categorization thing. But it's one of those books that really straddles that line, like in the same way that, say, the His Dark Materials trilogy and now the new one, what's it called? The Book of Dust. The way that they, depending upon the publisher, depending upon the market, depending upon who's reading it, maybe it's YA, maybe it's not. It doesn't really matter. Like, it's not doing a lot of the tropey YA things that you might expect, but it's also, it has them in abundance, and it's subverting them, or it's like, it's aware of them and consciously doing something else. Anyway, enough of that. I loved it, in part because one book, or one series that we've talked about multiple times on here before, is The Magicians by Lev Grossman. And we do not like it. Let me reinforce that we do not care for it. But
the first 50 pages were brilliant.
Yeah,
and then the rest kind of didn't hold up to what I was hoping for.
Agreed. So, if you are someone who either likes The Magicians or was disappointed by The Magicians, The Hazelwood is not a comparable book in that it doesn't have a lot of the same plot points, but it does have a very similar plot path, in that it's very genre savvy. It follows a line that you think is maybe going to be divorced from magical worlds, or, sort of like think about magical worlds in a different way, and then turns itself into an exploration of those magical worlds, like, with full force. Goes really into it. So, just that short description does this book absolutely no justice. It is phenomenal. I actually only picked it up because it wasn't on my radar at all, because Sarah Gailey was talking it up on Twitter, talking about how The Hazelwood was her favorite book of the year so far, back in like March or April or something. And I was like, oh, well, I really like Sarah Gailey's writing. If she really liked this, I'll pick it up. But it's totally... that anecdote is a good example of how word of mouth, someone who you respect talking about something, or someone passing along a book, like, there is no way I would have been aware of this book had I not heard from that tweet. So,
well, and the Hazelwood too, I think one of the reasons why people don't categorize it as YA all the time, although I would, is that it really flouts a lot of, if not all, of the major YA plot archetypes. Like it doesn't do the love triangle thing. It doesn't do any of the because I don't want to insult YA here. YA is like legitimately awesome in its own way, but it does have like this set of tropes that it relies and leans pretty heavily on, just like crime fiction and other genres too. So it doesn't really do a lot of the plot things or the character things that YA does, but the reading level, I think, is very clearly YA. It's the sort of thing which is far more YA in content appropriateness than The Magicians, I would think. And you don't have any of the problematic bits of The Magicians in terms of the problematic views of women and or like the triggering material that's in The Magicians. So this is the kind of book that I would recommend to people who started The Magicians, maybe encountered that very triggering scene in book 1 or 2, I'm forgetting which one now, and decided, you know what, I can't handle the content of this, even if I like the voice. I would say that the Hazelwood has the voice on point, and it's very sharply plotted. So it's great. It is YA in terms of reading level. It is not YA in terms of archetypes and tropes. And it is enough like these other magic realm exploring books that if you like those, you will like this. Pretty much definitely. And I thought it was really winsome. You know, it went somewhere different than I was expecting in a good way.
Yeah.
So I'm a
totally.
huge fan. And
agreed.
January was a really good month for sequels in addition to these other books. I just want to hit a couple of titles here without going into great detail about them, if that's okay.
Totally.
So we had a sequel to Charles Stross's series. The book, the second book in the series, Dark State, came out. That's kind of an alternate history, but alternate present history in a sense. Book, very interesting, brings in a lot of the sort of fascism, Nazism, sort of alternate history of tonal points that people are interested in right now. There was also a sequel to Josiah Bancroft's Senlin series, Senlin Ascends, that came out. Well, actually, Senlin Ascends, is that the... No, that's the first one. That was the first one, in January. Yeah. The second one came out much more recently and was also good, Arm of the Sphinx. There was Binti, The Night Masquerade by Nnedi Okorafor. Really great novella. You might want to talk more about that. There was Elysium Fire, the second book in Alistair Reynolds' Elysium Fire series. And there was also, why am I blanking on it? There was another sequel.
Beneath the Sugar Sky.
Yeah, by Shauna McGuire. So there were a lot of really great genre sequels, like book 2 or 3 that came out in January as well. Did you want to talk about any of the novellas?
I just want to hit those two that you just mentioned, the two novellas you just mentioned. Binti, The Night Masquerade by Nnedi Okorafor, and Beneath the Sugar Sky by Shauna McGuire. Both of those are number 3 in their respective novella series, which means that the barrier to entry is a little lower than if they were number 3 in a novel series. So if you haven't checked out those series, I would highly recommend them. I just... last week or the week before, I had forgotten a lot of what happened in the first 2 Binti novellas, so I just read them both again before I read Binti the Night Masquerade. The first Binti book is, I think, about 80 pages. The second one is a little bit longer, about 150, and Binti the Night Masquerade is the longest still at just over 200. All of Shauna McGuire's novellas are a little bit longer, around the 150 to 200 page mark, but all of those totally doable. Highly recommended. Check them out. January was a good month for novella series.
It really was.
Entries.
And February, I was just looking at the February list.
Yeah.
February was a hard-hitting month for novels.
It was.
And, oh, man. Okay, so do you want to start this one?
I will. Although, as I'm looking through our list, there's basically every other book that came out in February. We're like, ooh, we really like this, and this could be a contender for this award that we want to come up with. I'm going to start, actually, if you don't mind, with the best debuts, the first books from some authors that we really enjoyed. So the ones that we're eyeballing for the end of the year, as far as debuts go, are Sue Burke's Semiosis and Tom Miller's The Philosopher's Flight. Both of those are from both of those authors, I should say. Well, both of those books are fantastic, absolutely. But both of those authors are older, and what I mean by that is not that they're doddering around at 95 years old, but rather they're established. When we say debut, I tend to think of this is a new author who's mid-20s to mid-30s who just sold a book, maybe had some stories out. Sue Burke has published a lot of stories. Tom Miller, I think, has been a doctor and maybe some other careers, like a medical doctor.
EMT, yeah.
Right. So there's a lot, there's history for them. And I mentioned that because both of those things are relevant. Medicine in The Philosopher's Flight and the history of the stories that went into semiosis, for semiosis, obviously. But, both of those, even though we're calling them debuts, are debuts only in the sense that these authors have not published book-length works before.
Okay,
and
so
what a debut! Yeah. That's all I have to say about those.
What a
debut!
Okay, go ahead. Okay, so give me the 30-second summary of each of those for those who haven't read them.
All right, for semiosis, plants, are they intelligent? Are they not? Is settling new worlds a good idea, or isn't it? What happens when the people who leave ruins behind on said worlds might not be gone forever? There's a lot of questions there. The Philosopher's Flight. I'm going to spoil this if I say anything about it, and believe me when I say I picked this up off a shelf, and I was like, I just want to read this book, and I don't know why. Go read it, because as a complete surprise, it works really well.
It works really well. It's really great and elegant in how it treats gender. It's also, it does Montana right, even though Montana is not a huge part of the story. It is the only book I have read this year that has done Montana right. So kudos to Tom Miller to not screwing up Montana. Really appreciate it. Also, there's a learning of a new magical system, essentially. Kind of coming of age, learning a new magical system story arc, but done in a really, really refreshing way, while still kind of leaning on some of the old tropes that work. So it's really an elegant compilation or compendium or weaving together of things tried and true that work still, and also new and fresh elements. So yeah, I'm a fan of that. And semiosis, the way that the stories are collected together, they build on each other. There's a lot of generational work happening there. It's an interesting structural form that I haven't seen in anything else this year either. So huge fan of that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, on the subject of magical systems and magical forms, I also want to give some representation to two of our favorite YA books that have come out already this year, that are from February. Those books are The Bells by Danielle Clayton.
Which I haven't read yet, so no spoilers.
No spoilers. And Tess of the Road by Rachel Hartman.
It's so good. So do you want to talk about Bells and I'll talk about Tess?
Sure. The Bells is really, really interesting take on magic in general, as well as magical worlds in general, that manages to, if you've listened to us at all by now, you know that we love subversion and taking the expectations, the tropes, the cliches of particular genres and subgenres and turning them on their head. Not only does The Bells do that, but it also presents magic and what may not actually be magic, quotes around magic there, air quotes. But it does magic in a really interesting way, in a really new way. I felt like, even though I was familiar with the way that the story was unfolding, some of the language that Danielle Clayton was using, the way that she told the story, the characters who were in the story, the way they responded to situations they were in, and the magic that suffused the world, all of those felt so new and so fresh that I just, love this book. I didn't really expect to. I didn't have any expectations going into it. There wasn't really a lot of buzz. I didn't know anything about it. And I was really delighted. And I actually read this, right as I got a big crop of YA from the library. So this stood out not only from the rest of the books in February, but also from the rest of the YA I was reading at the time.
Yes, and I actually have to say that that's similar to my experience with Tess of the Road, in that there are elements, again, that are kind of in synergy with YA, but it really is also doing a lot of new things with those elements. So Tess of the Road is Rachel Hartman's latest book. It is technically in the same universe as, is it Serafina? Serafina, okay, I'm not making that up. I actually have not read the Serafina series because our library lost them in that people walked off with them. So they're on my list of books to read, but I'm determined to make sure the library buys them and that I read the library copy to justify buying this book for the library. So anyway, that complicated backstory is to explain the fact that I came to Tess of the Road a little bit anxious because I hadn't read these other books in the Serafina series. Tess of the Road is a standalone novel in the same universe as Serafina. You do not have to have read Serafina in order to read Tess of the Road. Right. I'm not sure if there will be a sequel or not. The ending of Tess of the Road is just so completely satisfactory in and of itself. I don't think it needs a sequel. I wouldn't mind getting more Tess of the Road because I freaking love it. But again, we're talking about a great and nuanced conversation about gender. And this is from someone who does not share anything in common with the character of Tess. Like, I am not sexually precocious the way she is. I'm not hetero the way that she is. But the way that her coming of age unfolds on the page is just so generous and full of heart and like sensitive to the conversations we often have about the queer and how the queer interacts with sci-fi and fantasy. It's beautiful. And it's really, really, it's like a great rambunctious good time in addition. So in that sense, it ticks the box for this was a fun read in addition to this ticked all of my, like, literary things I want to see in the book. So I'm a huge fan of that. The last book I would mention personally for February is a graphic novel. We did have one of our favorites, even still to date, graphic novels come out in February, and that was Jen Wang's The Prince and the Dressmaker. And again, talking about the queer intersecting with the genres that we're talking about on this show, it's just so, so good. It's generous. It's heartfelt. It made me cry at least twice. And the ending was all the joy and purity and good things that I needed in my life to be healing in the moment when I read it, which was perfect. So it's a great little graphic novel. It's a fairly quick read, and I highly recommend it for your lunch break at work when you're having a bad day. That's all I'm going to say.
Totally. And I just have one more book for February that I want to chat about briefly. It is The Gone World by Tom Sweterlish.
Sweterlish?
I'm not sure. I apologize if I'm butchering that. But it is completely different than anything that we've talked about thus far on this podcast. It is probably, if I was going to toss it into a genre, I would say it's a little weird-ish, but not necessarily in like the kind of like Lovecraftian or even like Jeff Vandermeerian way. It's just kind of unknown and unknowable, and that's what it shares with those different modes. But it's also, at the library and at a couple of bookstores I've found it in, it's actually put with the mysteries and not with the science fiction and the fantasy.
Interesting. But that's like Robert Harris with his alternate histories in which the Nazis win. So that kind of makes sense in a way.
Right. So if you're someone whose fancies are tickled more often by thrillers and mysteries, this might be a book that you want to check out. Obviously, we both thought it was phenomenal and really fun. And, it was more, I want to say for both of us, it's more in the weird camp than it is anything else. But it also, it's one of those books that kind of like grabs at half a dozen different genres and plays with them all and asks them to sit down at the same table and somehow manages to make it work. So
yeah. And it's really haunting. I would say tonally, its tone is what sticks with me the most, even when I forget plot details, which I still remember most of them, which, says a lot about how much I like the book. But what really, really captured me was the tone and the kind of way it gets under your skin, it gets into your blood. So I'm a huge fan of the voice of the book.
Yes.
So that was definitely, thank you for mentioning that one. I'm very glad you did. So the next month was an interesting month as well, because it was a little bit more of a catch-all. So we're moving into March. We had a lot of books debuting that made a big splash in terms of marketing that kind of missed the mark personally for me when I actually got around to reading them. So we're not going to go into detail on those. We're still going to highlight just our favorites, but there's fewer of them in the month of March, at least according to me. It was a good month for novellas. Again, we had Gods, Monsters, and the Lucky Peach by Kelly Robson. We had Void Black Shadow by Corey J. White, and we had The Tea Master and the Detective by Aliette de Bodard. I might be butchering that pronunciation as well. All three of those were really strong novellas. They might all have been Tor.com novellas for what I know. I don't know if you wanted to talk about any of those or whether you want me to talk about them, but they were all really strong novellas.
I would be very happy if you wanted to talk about them. However, I want to eclipse those choices. No, not eclipse. I would like to add to those novellas, my favorite novella from March, it was Angus MacIntyre's The Warrior Within, which somehow managed to impress me not only as a debut, so his first long-ish published work, but also because it was juggling so many things. It was, as we said in our awards last year, a complete space opera, and it's not easy to do that, in the length you have as a novella, but also, managed to communicate this entire politics of its future world. At the same time, it did a lot with cool artifacts and making the universe seem really populated and exploring its characters. Not only that, but actually exploring a main character who had multiple characters in his head. Like, it just did so much, and that sounds exhausting, but it was exactly as long as it needed to be. And the more novellas we read, the more I see that not every novella is going to do that with the same degree of poise and attention to craft. And so the novellas that are really special are really, really special. And for me, in March, The Warrior Within was that special novella.
Yeah. I mean, I would have to say, as far as novellas go, that month was it was packed with new authors, new novella authors who I hadn't read before. So in general, I was just really pleased, given the lack of novel-length works that really caught my attention, how the novellas were really pushing the envelope in terms of content and theme and voice. So yeah, major kudos to all of the authors mentioned. I'd say of the three that I mentioned, the Tea Master and the Detective really stands out.
Yeah.
Highly experimental. Agreed. It also featured some of the tropes I love, which is a sentient ship and a human pairing. And it also was kind of a re-envisioning of the Sherlock and Watson relationship, and in a way that was kind of queering it a little bit and weirding it a lot. And yeah, definitely probably my favorite of the trio that I mentioned. And I'm getting around to The Warrior Within. I need to definitely reread that one. I would also mention, just as kind of a trend for that month, that there were a lot of books coming out featuring royalty and the quote-unquote strong female character archetype.
Yeah.
You had Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. That book is in no danger of not getting good press. That book has lots of people who love it. There was also Blood of the Four by Christopher Golden and Tim Levin. There was Daughters of the Storm by Kim Wilkins. And there was also The Veil of Spears by Bradley Below. And there was Torn by Rowena Miller, and The Queens of Innis Lear by Tessa Grattan. And all of these books feature kind of some element of that strong female character archetype but usually also some sort of royalty element to it. So that month had a preponderance of those kind of books, and I think a lot of them felt a little bit rushed to market for me, and I'm not sure whether that was because every publishing house looked at all the other publishing houses and was like, oh, they're doing that strong female character book this month. We will also do our strong female character this month.
Yeah,
I don't know. That was kind of just something funny that I noticed about that month. There was a lot of those books. Right.
No, totally. I agree with that 100%. And it was even weirder because I was randomly, like, this had nothing to do, the timing had nothing to do with anything, but I was reading the Tierling series, Tierling trilogy. So I was reading a lot of Queens all right in a row, and it did a lot of those books that you mentioned, and then some others, and I'm not sure if they were later, if they were earlier, and they just didn't really impact us all that much. But again, this is the kind of thing, I'm glad it's out there. I'm glad that you have those kind of books out in the world, even if they feel a little rushed. But for readers like us who are, looking to give some imaginary awards away at the end of the year, having that kind of glut of the same basic idea means that none of them really stand out, unless they really kick ass. And I just didn't really feel like any of those books did.
And I'm really grateful, actually, that you recommended the Tierling series to me. I've only read the first one so far, but it was really good. I have the feeling that the book would have suffered if I'd read it, like, right in the middle of that galette, just because I was kind of, like, sighing and shrugging my shoulders a little bit at that point. Right. But I read it after the air had cleared a little bit, and I really deeply enjoyed it. I think that's kind of the quality level of queen or strong female character that I do connect with. And it's hard for me to connect with a character who is defined by that sort of character archetype or trope.
Right.
So I do want to give like kudos to Erica Johansson. Even though she's not a 2018 release, she's worth mentioning in companionship with those books.
Agreed. Totally.
Okay. So April. You want to start us off?
Yes, definitely. I would like to recognize the book called... Sorry, that was really awkward. I was trying to find it on the list.
The book, otherwise known as...
The first thing I want to recognize is Isle of Blood and Stone by Makia Lucier. I'm sorry.
Makia.
I'm not good at names.
I think.
Is it?
Because there's two eyes.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that gives emphasis to the eye. I'm going to run with that.
So, I love this, first of all. I did not expect... Again, a lot of these were, like, the books I ended up loving this year. From The Philosopher's Flight, to The Gone World, to... what the hell did I just mention? The YA in February, both The Bells and Test of the Road. Like, I just have been blown away by things that I have not expected to blow me away. There are other books, actually, as I'm looking through April, and again, I'm not going to call them out by name, but there are other books that I remember reading, and I was like, oh my god, I'm so excited for this book, and then it was really just middling. Like, I didn't really like it at all. But Isle of Blood and Stone, to return to our praise, I loved as a book, as an adventure, as a map, and as a book that had a geographer and geographers as major characters and a major theme. It was, I want to say, even if I wasn't studying geography, I would still be into it, because it was just not something I'd ever seen before. Because you know that all fantasy books, well, not all fantasy books, but a large number of fantasy books have the map at the front. And if you just Google fantasy maps, or if you look on DeviantArt for fantasy maps, which obviously I've done these things, you are going to find so many different examples, either that fans have made, that professional illustrators have made for books, that have been commissioned, that people have just made because they have lots of things in their head. All of those are amazing. But to actually take that and to sort of make it not the point of this book necessarily, but both the foundation, a MacGuffin, and another thing that pushes the plot forward in addition to that MacGuffin, was so incredibly smart. And it was one of those things that I was like, I can't believe this hasn't been done more often, and yet it's done so well in this book that I can believe that it hasn't been done more often, because it was done so well in this book.
And it really was. Yes, I highly recommend reading it, and we can't really talk about the actual MacGuffin without giving away a major plot device. So no spoilers, but if you enjoy that impulse which draws so many of us nerds to that map at the front of the book, you will enjoy the overall sort of plot of the Isle of Blood and Stone. Very inventive, but also, like really taking advantage of an long neglected possibility that fantasy has been kind of asking us to take for a while, I think. With the front map thing. So yes, okay. My first book for the month actually is in perfect conversation with the book that we mentioned earlier.
Excellent.
This is The Overstory by Richard Powers, which in my mind you cannot read separately from Semiosis. I think that those two books talk to each other in a way that enriches your reading of both. I read them pretty much one after the other, and The Overstory is dramatically different in tone and style and plot and everything from Semiosis. But it has a similar structural component in that you have multiple points of view characters. There's a certain element of generational writing to it, like passage of time. Not quite on the scale of Semiosis, which is really like when you're talking about generations, like it's multiple generations, whereas the Overstory is like one generation start to finish, but still like covering a lot of time. The Overstory is also about sentient plants in a sense.
Yep.
How we as humans engage with our natural environment, how we destroy our natural environment, how we could benefit from a healthier relationship with our natural environment. I mean, both Semiosis and the Overstory have very clear, like, environmental messages underpinning everything. Not gonna lie, that's a part of it. That also appeals to a reader like me, and it's really refreshing to see that that kind of component of science fiction done really well, because it's been around for a long time. Like, Cli-fi is not a new thing, even though it's having a moment right now. And there's a certain element of Cli-fi to the way that the Overstory and Semiosis are built. It's very lyrical. I've never read any Richard Powers before. I know that he's a very established author. I've never read him before. I'm grateful that this was my first encounter, because it's a really good first sampling of an established author's work. And I just think that the language is beautiful. The hints that are dropped about the plant sentience are really beautiful. Like, is it or isn't it? What does it mean if it is? What does it mean if it isn't? Does it matter if the plants themselves aren't sentient? What matters most, I guess, is how we relate to them. And yeah, it's just a really interesting sort of head-smashing, brain-exploding, fabulously long exploration of, I mean, it's a really thick book. I'm not going to lie. It's a big book. So anyway, that was my first pick for the month.
Cool. I also want to say that April, as I'm looking again through our list, April is really the first month where there are still a number of blank spots in what I would like to read from that month. There are, I hate to even mention things because I don't want to jinx it and like be like, oh yeah, I'm so excited for this book, and then it sucks. But a couple of the books that I am still excited for from April that I haven't had a chance to read yet are Jeremy Shipp's The Atrocities, which is another Tor.com novella. Time Was by Ian MacDonald, who is an author who we have talked a lot about before. He is the author of the Luna series, Luna New Moon, Luna Wolf Moon. I believe there's a third one coming out later this year. But this is, both of those books are books I actually bought and
you loaned them to me without reading them?
I loaned them to you. I didn't read them.
Tony,
I know.
love you.
I didn't think
so
about
good
it.
To me. Okay.
But anyway,
I'll read them first and send them back to you. How about that?
I plan on reading them.
You gave me a stack of like 10 books, so I'll put them at the top of the stack.
I did. Okay. But I also, because I feel like I feel like it is a fact that we have only talked about books up through this point, and there are also a number of TV shows that either started or wrapped up, or if they were streaming only, started and wrapped up in April. But we had the end of we had the beginning of season 3 of The Expanse, which has since
wrapped up and was
wrapped up.
God,
definitely.
So good.
I mean, we gave our award for best show last year to season 2 of The Expanse. Season 3 was better. So all I'm going to say there is...
It's going to be really tough to unseat the champion. Let's just put it that way.
The Expanse killed it.
We'll give it a whole episode of its own. Promise.
We will. Definitely. Okay. But we also had season 2 of The Handmaid's Tale debut in April. And like those couple of books, I have not yet started The Handmaid's Tale because that is something that I still need to do. It is heavy. I need to be in the right mindset for it.
Yes. Followed up with episodes of Queer Eye or something. I'm out of Queer Eye, so I'm a little hesitant to go back and finish the season. But
Yeah, totally.
Totally. But it was a good month. It was a month with a lot of books and a lot of TV in it. I feel like a lot of the publishers and the television channels, stations, streaming services were hitting their stride in the month. So there's a lot of good things there. There were a lot of competent things. A book that I enjoyed that you enjoyed a little bit less than I did was Catherine Valente's space opera. I thought it was pretty masterful, but again, I grew up in a Commonwealth country where like Eurovision is enjoyed. So it made a little bit more sense to me, I think, than it made to you. So
yes, and I also have to say, because Catherine Valente is someone whose work I've followed for a while and like tried to get into different things, and you know when you like have an author and you can see that they're fantastic, and it's just like the things that you've read by them don't particularly like it doesn't.
It didn't click for you yet,
right?
But
It didn't
I think,
click for
But you've read it. You since found the book that clicked for you with her, right?
I found the Catherine Valente books that I love. They are her Girl in Fairyland series. Check those out if you haven't. If you like Catherine Valente, if you haven't heard of her at all, it doesn't matter. Check them out. They're amazing.
And there were a couple YA books in the month worth mentioning as well. Dread Nation by Justina Ireland. Again, a million people are talking about that book, so it's not suffering for coverage. So I won't cover it much in detail here, except to say that it was a really strong showing. There was also Ash Princess by Laura Sebastian, another really competent young adult fantasy book. And yeah, I mean, there was just like a lot going on in that month. There were some books that I haven't read yet as well, but I have on my to-read list, and obviously you gave me the Atrocities and Time Wars.
Right.
So I will be reading those soon. Promise.
Sweet.
I'm so sorry. I didn't realize when you gave them to me that you hadn't read them yet. Now I feel like the worst friend in the world.
If I hadn't wanted to give them to you, I wouldn't have given them.
Okay, well, let's move on to the month of May so that I don't like wallow in self-revulsion too long. So
don't wallow there. Don't wallow.
So I have quite a few blanks in this month simply because a lot of the releases were by non-major publishing houses, and so they haven't been collected into Montana libraries yet anyway. But there were a couple books that I read that were real standouts. I would say the first one worth mentioning is After War, and this is a book that really, really lives in conversation with, and this probably makes perfect sense, American War, and also The Power by Naomi Alderman. So Omar El-Akkad and Naomi Alderman tied for our best novel, basically, last year. They were both really, really powerful near-future dystopias. And After War similarly takes this notion of the future of America is war, or like the future of the Western world is war because of X, Y, or Z MacGuffin. And some of those MacGuffins are a little bit more like hard science than others. But what I thought was appealing about After War is that it takes kind of some of those Robert Heinlein tonal elements, and it places them at the service of a strong female character who's not at all like the strong female character trope. So After War has a really pleasing, sharply written voice. The characters really leap off the page. You care about them, but there's also this notion that like in war, things change quickly. And so the plot really moves. Characters that you come to love get killed, and they matter. And I think that that's unusual for me in a war science fiction book. So often when you have those quickly disposed of characters, like you don't tend to care so much because the plot's still moving and you're still following the character who matters the most. I think that with After War, Lilith St. Crow did a masterful job of using little touches and little gestures and little tonal elements to make you care just the right amount about those, that retinue of characters who moves around the central character. And really, really compelling. I don't know that it's going to reach the same level of public frenzy, I guess, or recognition as American War and Power, simply because it came out after them. If it had come out last year, I think people would have been talking about it in the same conversations as those two books. And so it's almost a disservice to it that it came out 6 months after the two books that we were talking about. So anyway, I would say that that's my first mention. Definitely worth reading if you like that sort of really strongly written near future dystopia that's also definitely literary fiction.
Yeah, totally. Well, I would like to give shout outs to a couple of books that make me think that we need a new category for our awards at the end of the year, because what this category would be the beginning of series.
Okay.
The beginning of a series, because there are those books that are entries in an established series, which we did give an award for last year. They were number 2 or further along in the series. Or, we kind of gave like the overall best novel or best novella. And the problem with these first in a series is that by our own criteria, they wouldn't be eligible for that series award. But also, I don't really feel like some first series books can stand on their own because they're leaning so heavily on what's going to come later. So they throw a lot of interesting balls into the air, but they don't catch them intentionally because they're the beginning of a series. But it's harder to do that with a book that's supposed to stand alone, that has nothing that's supposed to come after, than it is to do with a book that is relying on information.
So I'm super curious now what the book is that's kind of started this conversation.
The 2 books that I'm thinking of are both really, really strong books, but they make me also really want to read what comes next. And I know they're both the beginnings of series. They are, not to keep you in suspense any longer, Medusa Uploaded by Emily Davenport and The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. Kuang? I'm actually not sure.
Kuang?
Kuang. Kuang. R.F. Kuang. Alright, so both of those books, really phenomenal. The Poppy War in particular has been getting a lot of press. I've seen it basically since when it came out in mid-May. I've seen it in every bookstore I've gone into, which is fantastic. R.F. Kuang has a really strong Twitter presence, which is cool, spot on. I will say only that I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to what comes next, so as to not give it so much coverage. Medusa Uploaded hasn't had the same level of coverage, I don't think. I've definitely seen it on lists since the beginning of the year. It had a blurb by Annalee Newitz, which feels like a big deal to me.
Yeah.
So I think that they're definitely, both of those books are, things that are not lacking for people talking about them. But in both cases, I think the hype is worth it. And, I'm looking forward to what comes next.
Yeah, there were a lot of, again, there were some thoroughly capable books that came out in the month of May that I'm just not going to touch on because they were capable, but not, in my mind, exceptional. I will say my final note for the month of May is that the second book in Martha Wells' Murderbot series came out.
Yes.
I have since read A Rogue Protocol, the third book, which comes out in the month of August. I had that one as an e-arc through NetGalley. Highly recommend this series. Number 2 benefits from reading number 3 right after, so I probably would recommend you read them in sequence once the third is out. Yeah. However, together, Artificial Condition, which is book 2, and Rogue Protocol, which is number 3, they're fantastic. I mean, Murderbot is my favorite new character in science fiction this year. So, I mean, he was actually, invented last year, but he's my favorite character in science fiction right now. Just, he's so, I'm saying it is so captivating. It flouts gender norms and sort of asks all these important questions about what is gender without getting too hung up on it. It's also just really compelling plot and there's lots of propulsive action. So huge hit.
Yes.
And then we move into last month, the month of June. And
there's one book that I feel like we both have a lot of blanks for June, so I know that there's going to be more good stuff, but there's one book that I feel like both of us maybe could be the best book of the year so far. You know what I'm talking about.
Well, yes. This book is Witchmark by C.L. Polk, and so I have a little bit to blame for this one, I think, in that I was given an arc of it that my boss acquired at the, it was one of the big library conferences this year. She got the arc because I asked her, get anything that's science fiction, get anything that's by Tor, anything that you see by those publishers, please grab for me. She grabbed me Witchmark. I read it. I cried. I gave it to you. I don't know if you cried, but you liked it. And
I loved it.
It's another book that it doesn't just tick all the boxes for like the elements that we want to see in a book. It also has a lot of heart, and it's really fun to read. So this is a book that does the queer in science fiction head on, and beautifully so. Do you want to talk about it a little bit?
I want to talk about it in that I almost don't want to talk about it because I think our favorite books so far this year have really taken. Oh my god! I'm basically gonna be repeating myself to say that this book is a subversion, but it really is. It's a subversion of fantasy. It's a subversion of alternate history. It's a subversion of what queer people in those genres and in all speculative genres can do and can be. Basically, it feels to me, as we're going through the first 6 months of this year, that what sticks in my mind is a book that either I go in not knowing anything about, or, having only like, oh yeah, I heard about this, it might be great, it might be terrible, it doesn't matter, I don't know. From that place of being ignorant about these things, I can find my very, very favorite things, in part because I have no expectations, which makes a lot of sense. So
it does.
I guess I mentioned that as a way to say, notice how I sneakily didn't give the plot away.
You didn't.
But, if you are listening to us and have listened to all 50-ish minutes of this, thank you. And, you haven't heard of a particular author, or maybe you've heard of an author but you haven't heard of a book, or maybe you've heard of the book but not really anything about it, or maybe, I don't know. We've talked up some of these to such a degree that hopefully, when you pick them up, and if you don't enjoy them, if they're not your particular cup of tea, that's fine. But a lot of these have really flown under the radar, and to go back to that Hazelwood story, I wouldn't have known about that. I wouldn't have known about Witchmark if you hadn't passed it off to me. So hopefully we're hooking you guys up, our listeners, with some great books that are very new and also new to us and can be new and great to you.
Yes, I agree with that. I think some of the best books I've discovered in the last couple of years when doing this podcast have been ones that I didn't expect to find, or were recommendations to me that I knew nothing about. So I'm a huge fan of recommendations. If you guys have recommendations for us to read, please go ahead and drop us a line. We'll give you that information in a couple of minutes when we start wrapping up the show. My last mention, really, because the month of June, there's still so many question marks. But my last confirmed hit of the month of June is Jacqueline Carey's Starless. And again, this is a book that kind of got me out of left field. It's a pretty substantial book, too. It's a fat book. I had tried reading one of Carey's other works that didn't work for me very well at all. And I think Jacqueline Carey is most known for Kushiel, or like the Phaedra trilogy. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, with like all the Kushiel books.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I knew that Carey wrote queer books. I didn't know if there was going to be one that I would like. I'm happy to report that Starless is that book. So Starless is pretty monolithic, both in terms of like the actual physical book is large, and also the things in the book, the tone, the styling, the characters are very monolithic as well. So you're dealing with a land in which, gods have come down to earth, essentially. And I'm not spoiling anything saying that. That's part of the jacket copy. That's like part of the premise. But what happens when the gods are poised to, fall, essentially? Like, they're coming up against a force that they can't oppose, really. So there's this group of humans who get together, band together, and are going into the fight. And so there's a little bit of that found family trope, a little bit of that shipboard romance trope, a lot of that super queer conversation that we haven't seen a lot of in fantasy, but is here in force and so well done. I would say that this is the first book featuring a gender fluid or possibly trans character that I've ever read that's been done well. And it's just, again, it's a book that's really generous. It has a lot of heart. And it also is fantastic on the sentence level, which is pretty important for me. Like, I do like a book that's beautifully made in addition to having a beautiful concept. So I think that those parts wed together really beautifully with Starless. So it's great that Witchmark and Starless came out in the same month, because they both tap into that big-hearted, sensitive to the LGBTQIA plus community that I love.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm excited for that one now. I have not even checked that out from the library, and you see now we have gaps, a lot of gaps in what we both read. Maybe one of us has read something and one of us hasn't. So lots of things,
which is actually
to
great,
discover.
Because there are so many books that you have read, because you've been reading more books than me while I've been going through this crazy year of mine. You've read a lot of books and been like, you know what? It's all right, but it's not great. And that allows me to skip ahead to a book that is potentially great. Yeah. So I'm a fan of us not always repeating each other's reads. However, Tony, if you don't read Starless by the end of the year, I will smack you. So do it. We're just going to hit a couple books in the month of July as mentioned. Since we are currently in the month of July, we haven't read most of the books that have come out in July or later. There are a couple of exceptions to that, in that I've read some books coming out in August. So there's some good ones to look forward to there, including that Rogue Protocol Murderbot novella by Martha Wells. But in the month of July, we have books by several of our favorites. We have Deep Roots, which is the sequel to Winter Tide. By Ruthana Emrys. I'm currently halfway through that one, and it is delightful. I thought the first one was probably better than I allowed it to be. And the second one is hitting me in a better moment. So I'm a fan. Ruthana Emrys, it's a great book. Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik just came out. And again, Novik is one of my favorite authors of all time, so it's very unlikely that it's not going to be a good book. And there's some other really interesting concept-driven books coming out in July and afterward, including Kill the Farm Boy by Kevin Hearn and Delilah Dawson. We have read some stories by Delilah Dawson. I believe she's been in some of these anthologies we've been reading.
She has, yeah.
And then there's The Wild Dead by Carrie Vaughn. There's Vox by Christina Dalcher. Mary Robinette Kowal has The Faded Sky. Becky Chambers has the third book in her series that's coming out. There's so much to look forward to, including another Adrian Tchaikovsky, which is Redemption's Blade. So, and then Ian McDonald's Luna Moon Rising comes out at the end of July. So this list that we've been giving you is only going to be added to. It's going to get a lot longer by the end of the year.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Before we close out, unless you have any more books to mention.
I think actually just one more mention.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just one more.
One more.
We have another book by my favorite non-binary author coming out at the end of the month. So we have another novella in the Tensor series by J.Y. Yang. So I loved the first two in that series, and their covers were among our most beautiful covers of 2017. Yeah. So we have a beautiful book to look forward to at the end of the month, in addition to probably the content being awesome. That's all.
Cool. So I mentioned almost an hour ago now that we would also talk about movies. We did not do that. We only talked very briefly about television. And I think the reason for that is that we don't really have anything on par with Okja, which came out last year and didn't really get a lot of buzz, and then it did, and there was kind of a groundswell. But nothing we've really watched has been an indie hit. It needs talking up. Like, the best movies that I think of when I think of what we've seen so far, I think of Black Panther, I think of The Incredibles 2, which, definitely bear talking about because they're so well done, but their box offices aren't really hurting from, us not talking about them. So just know that we've seen some good movies this year. We've also seen some really terrible movies. We went and saw Jurassic World,
which was
Fallen
amazing.
Kingdom,
which
was so bad.
Terrible. The science, you do not run from a pyroclastic flow. Just saying. No. However, in saying that, the movie was a masterpiece of bad science, and it was hilarious and a lot of fun to heckle with you. So, Tony, thank you for suffering through.
No, it was so. as a movie, it was so bad. As, like, an experience where we got to go and, like, laugh at it the whole time, it was really fun. So...
Yeah, and I have the feeling that there's probably a lot of great science fiction out there that I'm just not, that hasn't hit my radar yet, perhaps because this year of graduate school has been so intense. I haven't been following the news or something quite as much. It does feel like they're a little bit thinner on the ground. Like we didn't have Colossal. We haven't had anything like Colossal either.
Right.
Like Okja was a foreign language film. I can understand why I might miss a foreign language film.
Right.
I did not miss Colossal when it came out. Like, I had heard about it pretty much from the moment it came out. I haven't heard of anything like that yet this year.
Right.
So it's possible that it is just a slower year for kind of high concept science fiction. So if you want to prove us wrong, please do.
Well, and there was, thinking of foreign language films, like there was the anime Your Name last year, which did really well worldwide. It was, fairly well renowned. It was one of my favorite movies of last year. The only thing that I can think of that's come out so far that I know about, and granted that I know about is the caveat there, but there was Mary and the Witch's Flower, which was not really that good.
Well, there was also really Annihilation, which was one of your favorite things to make fun of in the universe. So, and then there was Ready Player One, which is one of my favorite things to make fun of in the universe. So,
maybe we'll have another podcast about the movies of 2018 and how they, by and large, failed us. But that will be later because there have been some really great ones too, and I don't want to take away from how much I really did like both Black Panther and The Incredibles 2.
I have heard of a movie that I haven't seen yet that I want to see that would probably fall in our category though. And that is A Quiet Place. I keep hearing about this movie.
Agreed.
I know that I need to watch it when I'm very soothed and not very triggered. But it's on my list of films to watch. When I'm very soothed and possibly very drunk. So we'll see how that goes.
Totally. No, I agree.
So if you can think of other movies kind of along that line or along the lines of what Annihilation should have been, please hook us the fuck up because we are missing our TV and movies. Because, The Expanse is over for like a year and we're grieving that absence because it was so good.
But we're happy it comes back.
We're happy it's going to come back. Thank you to those #Save the Expanse folks who flew that banner sign over Amazon headquarters and made sure that Jeff Bezos did like one good thing in his life. So thank you for saving the Expanse. We are beneficiaries of really an exceptional team, I think, with that show because the books we've dabbled in the books. They're competent, but the show, there's something about the magic that happens when you translate that series to television with the team that they've done it with. And it just has made something which I'm really proud to say came out in my lifetime. Like, this is an exceptional show that I will be happy to evangelize for the rest of my life. Good job.
Agreed.
Yep.
And on that note,
we've been here an hour.
We have. So why don't we wrap up our favorites of 2018 so far?
How would you like to do that? With another book or by just giving them our contact info?
Let's give them our contact info.
Okay, so if you have a book to add to our list, something to fight with us about, and or just want to hang because we're cool, you should come find us on Twitter, especially. That's where we're most responsive, and that's where I do all of my author matchmaking whenever possible. And so you can find us at imaginary_pod on Twitter. You can find Tony at deviance_engine.
Yes.
Or just Deviance Engine.
I think it's underscore.
I'm Googling you right now. Yeah, it is underscore. Okay, so I didn't lie. Deviance_engine for Tony and Intrepid_ly for me. And we would love to hear your recommendations and enthusiasm. We would also recommend that you check us out on our website, which we haven't updated as much as we would have liked during the summer, but we have been posting a lot of reviews too. So check us out on our website at Imaginaries.net. You can look at our awards for last year, compare against our midway point recommendations for this year, and you can also find us at our various, SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube links that Tony has very generously been maintaining for us on there. So, yeah. Can you think of anything else, Tony?
I cannot. Just make sure you watch what we do next time, because it's going to be great. And by watch, I mean listen. And by next time, I do mean next time.
And next time, we're possibly going to be yammering on a little bit about space operas, which is pretty exciting. So, that was an awkward laugh. Yeah. Catch you later.
All right, bye.
Bye.